Fáilte Ribh Golair Show on Irish NFL Show in association with QuinnBet, where we've been assessing our options like Matthew Stafford in the off-season, only to decide that there's no place like home after all of that. And into our humble abode, we welcome Jourdan Rodrigue, senior writer with The Athletic, covering the Rams, but also, as those of you who are familiar with her work will attest, she's on top of everything else that moves or even thinks about moving in the NFL as well. Jourdan, great to have you with us. How's your off-season going? Do you even get an off-season? It seems like you're never off our screens and our feeds.
I know. First of all, I'm so sorry about that. I think the world could use a little bit less of me in terms of the podcasts and the writing and the coverage. It just so happens that the team I cover mainly is been in the news like crazy, and then I am so fascinated by the league at large, and that's been a crazy off season already. It is an honor to be on with you, and I'll let you know when the off season actually does start. But I am so glad that we're talking today. I have been a fan from afar for a long time, and y'all were so patient with me when, the fires hit Los Angeles and there was just a bunch of moving parts, myself included. And so thank you for your patience and for continuing to check in. It meant a lot from, I know, way far away, but I really could feel it meant a lot. So thank you.
Oh, not at all. And as you know, the appreciation very much flows the other way as well, Jourdan. And yeah, I know we were talking about this before we started recording, and we've spoken about it on the show ourselves, but we've been watching what's happened with the fires and with the community and its attempts to rebuild, which I know are still in a very early stage. And, our hearts and thoughts are very much with you and all of the community affected. I know that's going to be a difficult rebuild job, but it's also heartening, as you were saying, to see how people are rallying together amid that very difficult time.
Yeah, it's interesting being on the ground. I mean, even at a Rams practice, running to cars with players, like when we had to evacuate one of those days, there's such a combination of people from all over, everywhere on any given NFL team, and so many different types of backgrounds, young people, older people. There are people who have been through fires before, who are Los Angeles natives. There are people who have never seen a wildfire before, or seen a natural disaster before. And this was just really to see how people just on a team level and then much broader into the community could come together. It really did reiterate that football is such a beautiful thing, because within this, would-be structured grid of lines exists every range and possibility for humanity that exists. And so I think watching that all funnel into the same direction, to give into the community, to use the resources they do have as NFL teams and players to try to help, and to first be helpers and then second be players. For me, it was very moving, very impactful time, very scary time, but deeply moved by the entire thing as well.
It really did seem, Jourdan, looking at it again from afar, that when the team, leaned into this and put the city on its back and made the best of its ability to lift the community, it seemed, first of all, heartfelt, and it really seemed to make a genuine difference.
It did. And, I watched when I covered that game, the relocated game in Arizona. I drove also. Some of them flew, a lot of them fans bust. I drove because I have a dog. And so my dog's in the back and we're on an adventure, going to Arizona for this relocated game. And I would, see these fans in the stands that game, adults just holding each other and crying when they saw the LA Fire Department signs and the banner. And then the players really making a point to, again, put the community first and the game second. I think it went hand in hand that the adrenaline and the pure feeling and emotion of that really showed up all over the field in that wild card win. But they were also able to compartmentalize aside what the bigger picture was and what the bigger meaningful thing that was happening was, and how much more broadly it affected. It was, I thought, well done by them that they didn't take it and make it, teams are so good at making these big moments into this is adversity. And it's it's not about you right now. And yes, some of you have been affected. Some of them were evacuated. A couple of staff members lost everything. And so some of them were literally working through it as they went. But this was also never taken to the it's about me phase. This was always about the community. For a league that is so self-centered, and a league that is so just a massive machine and massive system across the world at this point, it was extremely refreshing and moving, like I said, to see everybody look outward versus inward, and everybody look to exactly where they could go help, whether it was by their action on the field or with each other as teammates or into the community. That to me was very profound. It was very organic. And unfortunately, it was because of a massive and horrific event, but it was also, like we said off camera, when these things happen, you do see the best in people. And this was the case with this group.
Jourdan, what does your dog do when you're covering games? That's fascinating to me.
Okay, so we have a routine. He's 12, so we're in quite a routine. I rescued him 11 years ago. We have quite a routine. He's been covering the league as long as I have, is what I say. And so sometimes I've been able to bring him to training camps, which has been awesome. He is the star of the show. But he also has a camp, like a sleepaway camp that he goes to. And these two attendants that have been there forever, they wait out when they know he's coming. Like, they have a copy of the NFL calendar, and when they know, he's a very endearing fellow, and when they know he's coming, they just they wait, they circle it, they check in with me, like, Tucker's coming, right? And they wait outside, they wait for him to come in. Like, it's a very endearing. It makes me feel better about some of the travel, because he's essentially going to stay with at this point family. Which is an endearing thing, and he enjoys it. And then he acts up when he goes, "They let me do this. Why won't you let me do this?" So it's a whole thing.
Yeah, I've started to become, I need to confess this, low-key obsessed with NFL reporters and their canine friends now, because I heard you and Colleen Wolfe on with
Yes.
Greg Rosenthal on NFL Daily, and it's a fascinating story for people who haven't seen it. Sorry, I'll recap quickly, but too long don't read version is Colleen Wolfe's dog Kima has got some amazing athletic ability. And,
she's incredible. She's extraordinary.
Anyway, we need that athletic report of NFL reporters' dogs when you finally get time away from the actual beat, Jourdan. And the beat took you to Indy, to the combine. Mm-hmm. What did you take away from the combine?
Well, it's interesting. It's a shifting structure. It's a shifting cycle where we're seeing, the Rams were on the forefront of this, the 49ers not far behind, a couple of other teams as well, where some of the testing and some of the things that the combine exists for in public are not being weighed as valuably as they had been in the past. Things like the 40-yard dash, things like they're made a scene of, a show of, because it's entertainment. But a lot of teams are looking at GPS calculations. They're getting GPS data from colleges now, as well as putting their own players through their own tests during 30 visits, those types of things, pro day, all of those more in-person things where you're on the field with these prospects. And you're seeing much more emphasis being placed on, at times for some teams, the interviews that take place at night. And then also the all-important medical, which often happens way behind the scenes and is the thing that we talk about the least, in part because, unfortunately, it's a pretty grueling and invasive process that the players have to go through with all of the 32 teams, so that everybody has the same data set to work with as they make medical assessments. So there's a shift happening between the priorities of the combine. And I think you've started to see the NFL implement more events, such as women's careers in football forum that happens every year there, as the Big Data Bowl that happens every year there now. A lot of networking, career development, and vendors, third-party vendors coming in to hawk their wares. S2 Cognition is always there. Whether you like them or hate them, they are there. The different types of concussion prevention technology there. Everyone will set up in the convention centers, and that's where I think the real future of the combine is shifting. And then the present, which will always be important, is all of the secret trading and all of the late night circuits that, people, agents and executives from teams and coaches and assistant coaches all will travel on and sort of trade secrets with one another. It's all very hush hush because it's not allowed right now. And so it's one of those things where, and reporters, of course, in tow, tagging along the entire way, trying to lurk and gain any sort of tidbit that could help. You start to see these big catalytic moments that actually have nothing to do with the combine, except for the fact that an agent is at the combine talking to people, become more and more in vogue, and part of why people do tune into the combine, maybe less so than the testing themselves. The data that's available to teams now is incredible. Once the combine starts modernizing some of that in the way where it's more publicly a part of the process and more naturally spoken about as a part of the process, like, hey, this is the jugs drill, or this is the cone drill, this is the short shuttle. Here's why the teams are actually going to be using this and testing, which they've done a better job of over the last couple of years, less so running in a straight line and how fast you do it.
Yeah, it's interesting as you say it, because I heard Sean McVay on with Dan Patrick recently explaining quite diplomatically but also assertively why he doesn't go to the combine. And one of the things he also brought up was when Dan Patrick was asking him, how did you make such a success out of Puka Nacua and what did you identify there? And he talked about aggressive hands and broke it down in beautifully McVay-esque eloquent detail.
Sure, yeah.
But you're sitting there thinking, that's not something I don't think I would have ever seen at the combine. That's certainly not a window where you're going to see that. They're watching huge amounts of tape. They're watching huge amounts of games. As you say, guy sprinting 40 yards, it's entertaining, but it's not going to determine your chances of success in the league, right?
Exactly. And the Rams, I think, have been on the forefront. I spent last year with their scouting department. My timing could not have been better. It was an accident, but my timing could not have been better. They won the award amongst their peers for the best draft class of 2024, obviously hitting on multiple starters, just like they did in 2023, including Defensive Rookie of the Year, Jared Verse and his teammate Braden Fisk, and sort of the process behind that. And it was interesting because they would sit there and they would tell you, when they're evaluating Puka, no, they did not think at the time he could develop into Puka Nacua, record-setting star as a rookie, who is now about to and being poised to and positioned to take on the significant leadership and star receiver, wide receiver one role with this football team into the future. No, they were not thinking that when they were looking at him and ascertaining who he could be as a prospect. But they did really look at his blend of his personality. They have a bunch of tests that they run players through. They went to sit down with him at BYU. That's a very rare thing. They only do that with a certain number of prospects. It never gets out, which is why you never know who they're going to draft, which is why they can get players to fall to them in later rounds. And they also understood that if they could get this guy in their building with their medical staff and kind of prevent some of the injuries that he'd suffered, they could really make the most out of this skill set that truly embodies what Sean McVay does like to do with his offense. And they sort of didn't put a ceiling on him. They didn't know if he'd hit that, the top level that he did, but they didn't put a ceiling on it, or they didn't rein in some of the potential, some of the opportunities that he had. And so it is interesting how luck does factor in. There's a lot of strategy. I think the Rams are very technically gifted at the draft because they understand that they're going to go control the things that are controllable, and they're going to figure out how to fine tune them to the nth percentage of understanding, of analytics, of process, of film, of football, of knowledge, of communication between coaching staff and front office. But there's also luck involved, right? He still has to get to you in the 5th round, as Sean McVay loses his mind at Les trying to get him to draft him earlier.
As you mentioned, it's been a busy offseason for you and all those who focus on the Rams. Matthew Stafford, let's talk about Matthew Stafford, because it seems like ultimately both sides got what they wanted here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think this is going to be something we do all year, every year until he retires. And then, as Sean McVay said, and I truly believe this, the moment he retires, you start the clock on the gold jacket with him. So It's sort of a nice little last few years to have into the glorious sunset of your future as a retiree. So I feel like it was an interesting process because I think a lot of people logically, and there was logic to it, thought that this was going to be a foregone conclusion, that he would remain with the Rams. But I think hand in hand with that assumption was that maybe the Rams would move more from their terms. And over the last 2 seasons, they just have not. They've preferred to stay with Matthew Stafford on a year-to-year deal. They believe that is more of a compromise in his favor, and also helping them a little bit with the understanding that he's played incredibly the last 2 seasons, but he's 37 years old, and they have to understand that at some point they're going to need to figure out who his long-term replacement is. And so they don't want to be limited in that process with a multi-year structure with their quarterback who is starting for them. So I think explaining that in a way that did not make him feel like they were already moving from him, in a way that made him feel respected as he should be and valued as he should be, less so the financial parameters. I think the year-to-year thing was the biggest message that they had to communicate with him. There were other teams, as we reported at The Athletic, my fantastic colleagues and myself, who do great work, which if you are a Heed the Call listener, you know what that reference is to. We were all of the understanding through our reporting that the Raiders and the Giants had multi-year guaranteed offers out to him. should he ultimately be tradable. So the Rams explaining the year parameters and him initially kind of wanting to go explore, is there something more multi-year available with another team? Plus would the finances meet what he was looking for? It was very interesting how open all of the communication on that front was. And basically like, yes, go look, go fact check. If you do want to be there, let's talk about it. If you want to be here, this is where we're at, and let's talk about it. And I think that was sort of a unique way that this process played out, including that truly unhinged time of a 6:30 meeting on a Friday. Like, why would anyone want to do this? But Sean McVay having this meeting with the Staffords basically to say, all right, we're still here. This is still where we're at. What do you think? And them deciding that they were ultimately going to continue, as Les Snead calls it, their vow renewals for the 2025 season.
What do you make of the Raiders side of this equation, and specifically Tom Brady's role? Because you swing and miss on Ben Johnson. Okay, maybe that wasn't going to happen. You swing and miss now on Matthew Stafford too. Perhaps that was a longer shot than it looked, although they looked like they were pretty damn serious about it. Does that erode Tom Brady's capital in this a little bit as the closer that, you know, Mark Davis would ideally like him to be?
Yeah, I think the fact that there was a possibility. I think the fact that, you know, I know that the joke is like right now I see it floating around on social media or whatever as a disaster as social media is these days. But it's like, oh, just the Raiders are the team you test markets on, or the Raiders are the team you test value on, or you try to. That's not actually what happened here. Like the fact that there was a possibility that this happens, the fact that, you know, they felt enough like this could happen to where they outlined an actual contract to his agent, Jimmy Sexton, which again, we reported in The Athletic. The fact that that was even something that was that close or definitively possible to be out in the media the way that it was. I mean, it's not easy. It's not just like they hand you this information, you know, the fact that that was as possible as it was, I think does say a lot about Tom Brady's clout within the organization. I think it's a two-sided thing too. I think it is a interesting and impactful lesson for the organization as a whole, that he can't just get whatever he wants. That we're going back to old Tom Brady days where he had to scratch and claw and actually work his way into the things that he wants, which he did way back in the day, right? And so now John Spytek, who I think is brilliant, and Pete Carroll, who I think is brilliant, you know, those guys coming together with Mark Davis have to really understand and establish like what their process will be when they take these big swings. And I also think, talking with John Spytek at the Combine, you know, I also think that he's very comfortable with the presence of Tom because they already know each other. They already go back. You know, John Spytek was the one who made the call saying if Tom Brady wanted to come play for the Bucs. So they're used to making that big phone call. And so while the Tom Brady element is, I think, the big headline from all of this, I also think these three guys, that the power circle and Mark Davis sort of at the top with the wallet, they're all really figuring out what exactly is achievable for them right now and what kind of, I guess, clout they still need to build in order to be an automatic yes when they take the biggest swing for the top player available.
I suppose to your point, the last time we saw Tom Brady have a couple of big losses, he went on and tacked on another 3 pretty big wins.
One of them was Matthew Stafford. One of his last big losses was Matthew Stafford, which is nobody thinks about that. It breaks my brain. Like, that's wild to think about.
Cooper Kupp is on the way out of the organization, Jourdan, and you could see how warmly Sean McVay paid tribute to him and the really lovely things he said about him, just what an impact he's made on the organization. That really is the end of an era. It's not often when you see a player leave a team and you go, wow, that's the end of something big. But culturally, the impact that he made, how Sean McVay essentially was able to build that offense, if I'm not overstating the case, around a player with Cooper Kupp's attributes. It's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to tell, if you don't mind, if you'll indulge me for a second, I want to tell the listeners like this Cooper Kupp impact on this organization. You alluded to it perfectly. Like, he literally is the reason why so much of offense changed in the league from 2017. It wasn't just Sean McVay. I covered this in my series of play callers back in 2017 when Sean McVay, little upstart 30-year-old, where everyone was like, who the heck are you? What are you doing here? Where's your mom? You know, like, and he comes into the league and he's going to go tight end heavy. In fact, if you go and look at their draft class, their first pick, which Sean McVay always has their first pick, is a tight end. And they're looking at, and they have multiple tight ends on the roster. They have a fullback on the roster at this point. Like, he's going to go tight end heavy. He's looking at multiple tight end sets. He's looking at 12 personnel. He's looking at 21 personnel. He's looking at like this element of his offense, that's what he wants to run. And that's what the Sean McVay offense is going to be. Well, about halfway through OTAs, he sees Cooper Kupp, and Cooper Kupp is standing on the sideline, because when you put in an extra tight end, that means that you sub out Cooper Kupp and he's off the field. And Sean had this like clarity moment where he's like, well, that kid can do all the things that this tight end is doing. And in fact, he's a better receiver, and he's kind of going to be a better blocker, I feel like, based on how active he's getting after it in the run surface. So why am I taking him off the field every 2 snaps in order to get more tight ends on the field? Like, why wouldn't I just rebuild my offense to flow through these 2 receivers, Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods at that time, who can be like miniature tight ends? And that's how the 11 personnel offense that Sean McVay like blew away the league with Cooper Kupp, with Robert Woods, with Jared Goff, with Todd Gurley establishing an incredible run game out of, and all of the passing concepts flowing out through that, with what I like to call 11 and a half personnel, because it's really 12 personnel, but it's receivers doing all the dirty work. So it's like, I'm waiting for my joke to catch on. It's been like 7 years and it still hasn't, but maybe one day. And so that is actually how it happened. That's Cooper Kupp. That's his legacy. That's his schematic legacy, let alone to even say how many people he's mentored in that building, how he has made Sean McVay a better person, which Sean will tell you, how he has grown and developed and really become we watched him grow up really from his 20s into his now early 30s. So this is a hard thing for this organization. It is something they seem determined about. It is a hard thing. And I think both of those things can be true at the same time, and certainly are in this case.
Yeah, I know he's 31, and I know injuries, as they always do, will slow someone's march. But I find it fascinating on the day, and as we're recording on Wednesday here, that we learned that DK Metcalf wants a trade, and that's lit up people's eyes on the wide receiver front. You think about DK Metcalf's potential to change your organization, to change its prospects. You think about Cooper Kupp's potential to change your organization's prospects. I mean, there's got to be a landing spot for this guy. And there's a lot of potentially intriguing ones. Maybe it's the Commanders, maybe it's the Bills. You can look at this in a lot of different ways. A piece like that can really do magical things for what is possible for a clever offensive coordinator to scheme.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to see DK with the Commanders, actually. I think that's a great fit. With Cooper, it's interesting because he, even if he's not the one receiver at this point, he can do so many different things to help unlock like several more pages of your run game playbook. So teams that are really committed to the run, I think will take a long look at him and are taking a long look at him. I sneakily think he would be great with the Baltimore Ravens, for example. I think he would be a great fit with the Patriots, not to play into stereotypes.
They have precedent for taking guys late in their careers and squeezing a nice couple of seasons out of them too, right? We saw them with Steve Smith in the past, right? And others. They have a track record here.
Yeah, another former Triple Crown guy, by the way. They sure like to bring those guys in, right? So I do think that's kind of sneakily a really good fit, and one maybe that people aren't talking about as much. I like him with the Texans potentially as well. Nick Caley, who coached Cooper in Los Angeles, is now their offensive coordinator. So there's a match there. They're also kind of looking to overhaul and improve elements of their run blocking, elements of some of their pass protection that Cooper has always been very willing and able to do. He I still think gives a franchise so much, right? And because the Rams have decided they're flowing things through Puka Nacua, not just from an on-field standpoint, but they're basically pushing him into, hey, it's time for you to be the leader. You are the face of this young double year win draft class, these 10 starters that are now this absolute core of this roster. And they need that to be their full identity. It's why moving from Matthew was even a possibility in the first place. It's a question they're going to have to answer at some point. If he found a better option elsewhere, this really could have been that year. Now they're better with Matthew Stafford. Everyone knows that. Nobody's arguing that. But the fact that they nailed those last 2 draft classes, that their identity overhauled as fast as it did, expedited what is really a difficult process, expedited what is really a difficult conversation, because I don't think any of us would argue that Cooper still has some good football left in him.
Jourdan, we're heading into what's going to be a frantic and very interesting week here, heading up to the end of the league year. And as you mentioned at the combine, all the buzz and all the quiet conversations happening, and they're not smoke-filled rooms anymore. I guess we have to dispense with that.
Thank God.
Anachronistic description. Whatever they're filled with now, vape-filled or gummy-filled.
Oh yeah, you know what? That's actually a good point. I did see some vapes. Yeah, I did see some vapes. Yeah.
But all those conversations are happening. There's going to be a lot of players on the move. We know that, but looking at from what we can tell, what doesn't look to be a particularly world-setting quarterback class in the draft, it's looking like an off-season where the strong get stronger, where you're not necessarily going to see anything transformational. There are good moves to be made, though. There are intriguing players who are potentially available. What are you looking forward to? If we're looking at our cheat sheet for the next week ahead, what should we be watching most closely, and which teams should we be watching most closely?
Yeah, I think the Commanders are certainly a team to watch because they got tantalizingly close, and I think that while on paper they look like they could take a step back, I think they want to wrinkle up that paper and throw it away. I think they'd like to get better at a couple key positions, particularly with possible trades, free agency. I would definitely keep an eye on New England. They have so much work to do, and they're going to probably build a lot of that through their draft classes. At the same time, they have a quarterback who you can put like some key veterans around right now because the quarterback does not cost them a lot of money. And the quarterback is going to make this team readier to win faster than expected, similar to what we saw CJ Stroud do with the Texans, another team who I really have an eye on, particularly with what they do with their offensive line, some of the scheme elements of that, but then also how they make these decisions regarding their receiving core in free agency and ahead of free agency. And, it's interesting. The 49ers are always, that dreaded juggernaut to like sort of keep an eye on because they seem caught between a rock and a hard place right now where they want to overhaul part of their roster that they already invested in. And then they have other guys who can still play, but are nearing the twilights of their careers, but they clearly can still play. They've got a contract coming up for their quarterback. I would expect them to be a little bit more active, just maybe in shedding certain contracts and trying to offload players. And obviously we already saw that with the Deebo Samuel move. And I think the Bills they've got to do it. If you look at their contracts, who's going to become free agents past this year, you absolutely have to talk about the Bills making the push of all pushes this season, really finally trying to get past the evil empire and making it their year. We know they're always a contender with Josh Allen, but they have so many free agents coming up after this next year that they are not going to be able to pay. So this has to be like the go all in, try to do what you can trade wise year. And I think we're going to see more trades than usual too, because the free agency class is just very thin at the top.
Okay, look, really looking forward to that. We've got a ton of free agency coverage coming up here on the Irish NFL show ahead of the start of the league year, as we mentioned. We'll be building up towards the draft, of course, too. We'll have plenty more interviews with players, coaches, NFL bigwigs. We got one of those on the way under wraps at the moment. I can't say anything too much at this point. And of course, elite beat writers covering all your favorite teams, among which, of course, we include you, Jourdan Rodrigue. Thanks so much for joining us on the Irish NFL show.
Thank you. And I want to, on the record, I did not fight anyone at the Starbucks. So thank you for having me.